Priorities are important.
Right. And let me jump in on a slightly related question. What is the best way for the state, irrespective of who's in government, to enable this, right? And the sort of debate, the present debate, is around freebies, subsidies, welfareism. We've just had elections that have concluded, and one of the reasons, for example, Dr. Rajan, for the win for the BJP, one of the reasons, not the only reason, in a state like Madhya Pradesh, where the chief minister has been now an incumbent for almost 20 years, is seen to be a welfare scheme targeted at girls and women, which actually gives 1,000 rupees straight into the bank account of women, called the Ladli Yojana. Now, you have not been a fan of subsidies, but you have been, you do admire the efficacy of DBTs, direct benefit transfers. How do you see this debate? Because today every party is competing at election time to offer what have come to be known. The Prime Minister calls them Revadi, somebody else calls them freebies. How do we understand the subsidies versus freebies versus direct cash benefit schemes?
Yeah, I think it's very simple. My benefit is a benefit, your benefit is a freebie or a Revadi. So, that's how political parties see each other. Let's get away from this particular issue beyond recognizing that, yes, direct transfers to relatively poor people, if appropriately targeted, can be a huge benefit because it can give them the means by which they can make their lives a little better and invest in their own future. Invest in girls going to school, but even boys going to school, better nutrition, which will help reduce the problems of malnutrition that we talked about. So we are not against. In fact, we have a whole chapter in the book on how we reduce inequality, how targeted transfers can help by empowering the poor. That said, that can't be your only focus. You have to think about, many parents over the pandemic took their children back into government schools, which they had left because the government schools were not providing enough quality for their children. And so now that they're poorer, they've gone back to the government schools, but you can't essentially condemn them to a second-class existence by not improving the quality of government schools. And they differ widely between government schools, say in Delhi, and government schools in Jharkhand. There is a huge difference in quality, which means a huge difference in life chances between those two sets of kids who go to one to this place and one to that place. We have, excuse me, we have an ability to remedy these differences. And that was what government should focus on. Clearly, education is a state subject, but the center can aid a helping hand. And now, with the help of technology, we have so many ways we can do better than what we are doing in improving the quality of education. For example, one of the biggest problems in schools is some kids fall behind. When they fall behind, the teacher has too many kids on their hands to look after these children who are falling behind. Teachers teach to the average, not the lowest or the highest. And so they lose the kids who are falling behind. With technology, we can actually identify those kids faster, and we can try and bring them up to speed if we have the right incentives in place within the schools, but also we have the right technology. In fact, going forward, if all goes well, we'll have AI tutors for the kids falling behind. But this is not just techno babble. There are places like Pratham which have used technology to bring kids up to speed in a much better way. And we have to learn and we have to recognize this as priority one. Because if our kids aren't capable of getting jobs down the line, it doesn't matter what we do on the growth front, they still will not get those jobs.
So I want to ask what some might say is counterintuitive. In your book, both of you, let me take this to you, Dr. Lamba. You paint a picture of, in a way, the troubles that lie beneath, as it were, the GDP data, the fifth largest economy story, the S&P ratings, and you talk about jobs, jobs, jobs. We've just had the BJP romp home in 3 state elections, right? And if there was this kind of distress, some might ask, how then, why then has the BJP won again? how then do we explain the fact that the Congress has not been able to win a second term for any state government since 2014? And I'm not trying to draw both of you into a sort of taking political sides. I'm just trying to understand the concept. And Dr. Rajan, correct me if I'm wrong. Did I read this in your book or somewhere else where you quoted TN Nayanan, I think, and you did, right? You quoted Nayanan, and Nayanan wrote this column about how even if people don't see a clear economic future, they still see they still identify the government with the future. So they don't necessarily link their idea of India or their idea of their own lives to their immediate economic reality. So I'm just trying to understand that. Dr. Lamba, if you want to take that.
Yeah, Brother, I think this is something we delve or we try to delve deeply in the third part of the book, and I think it's an interesting both an academic and a lived debate, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I think I mean, you travel for your stories extensively across the country, and I think we'll be amiss if, and both in doing our job honestly, if we said there is not a genuine and deep jobs crisis in India. It's for everyone to see. I think
No, I agree, but it doesn't seem to
yeah, I'm
necessarily
coming to that.
result in collective political rage. That's the
Yeah.
only point I was trying to make. Yeah.
Let me give the viewers like a two or three kind of frameworks to think about this. Okay, one is think of the term prisoners of our own instruments, and think of the term demand diffusion and demand deflection. Okay, so what do I mean by this? There is a demand, right? You saw the protests with Agniveer. You saw the protests with when there was a scam in the railway recruitment. Even the farmers' protests to some extent, were a reflection of what we call in the book the tunnel effect, right? One lane in a tunnel is moving very quickly, the other lane is static, and then the frustration grows. Now the question is, what forms does the frustration manifest in, right? So there is a demand. It's very diffused. Okay, you need some kind of collective action to make that demand visible. Now, how are we prisoners of our instruments? We are used to certain instruments as people to premise our demand on. So what are these instruments? These instruments are broadly now limited to reservations in government jobs. And now the new thing in the last 10 years is welfareism. So we organize around these instruments, right? This is what we know as people. When I want to ask my government something, I will organize my demand around instruments that I'm familiar with. The third is demand deflection. So as a government, I understand that doing the hard things is very hard, like fixing education, fixing health. It's not like that the government is not trying, or any government for that matter, they try. But to claim, it's much easier to claim credit around instruments that I'm comfortable with. So I also, as a government, go back to jobs and welfareism. And this is not about just the BJP or the Congress. It's just generally a political economy story of India. And I think this is a problem, and this is where we try to come in, both as as intellectuals and civil society, to move the needle on what are the instruments around which people can demand things. And I think to say so, since most people agree that there is a jobs crisis, I think what we're trying to argue in the book is that India needs to have a vision about its own self as to how it's going to generate these jobs. And it's very important to understand when you look at the data, right? Like just when people look at the data and when you report the data, especially on jobs, it's very important to understand that only aggregate numbers are not the right prism, because India also has a very high amount of disguised unemployment. So what does that mean? That means that if one person or two people are sufficient to till a field, there are 6 people on that field working, and they're all counted as employment. Even the services sector, suppose you go to get your coffee at a Starbucks in Delhi or Bombay, there are 7 people behind the counter. This is disguised unemployment, because the productivity of the individual is much lower than what it should be in driving the aggregate productivity of the country. So yes, there is a jobs crisis. Yes,
Right.
you're right that it is not being manifested in a political voice, but I think that is a failure of us, both as an intellectual class, or maybe to some extent even the media, to provide avenues so that the instruments can change, and the demand is no longer diffuse but concrete. I hope that makes sense.
Well,
Yes.
Rohit,
Dr.
uh,
Rajan, go ahead. You want to add to that? Yeah.
the demand is concrete, but as Rohit says, it's channeled. The
Yeah.
demand is for more reservations. I mean, think about what is happening in Manipur and the fight between the Kukis and the Metis. Some of it is about reservation. And similarly, I mean, you hear this again and again when we're talking things like caste census and so on. It's all about reservations. And the second aspect is government jobs. So it's either it's can I get more access to government jobs, and can you create more government jobs? But really, the answer has to be that the private sector has to expand. There is no way for the government to create the kinds of jobs that we need to deal with the deficit that we already have, but also for the teeming millions who will come in. The numbers are just hard to appreciate, that we're talking about tens of millions every year for the next 30 years. Those are the kinds of jobs we have to create when the overall job creation is so much lower. So bottom line is, we need to think about how we enable that. And part of our answer is, you need to create the material that can take the jobs, that in business people want to look for that, because they see that this is well developed human capital that I can use. And that's why the answer has to start with, let's start with education and healthcare. And yeah, you will say this is going to take time. Obviously, it will take time. But very soon you will see the results paying off in small ways if we upgrade the quality of our human capital. On the other hand, if we do nothing, we will end up 15, 20 years from now with having 35% of the workforce which simply cannot do any work because they were malnutritioned early on in life.
And just to come on that, just in relation to the GDP question you had asked and what Raghu said,
Yes.
Just sort of to differentiate between short-term kind of data that is coming in and the long-term path that we are on, it is whenever we see GDP data in the next 5 years, we should ask ourselves, how is private consumption doing, and where is private investment? Both of them continue to be very, very low. So as Raghu was saying, that a lot of it is driven by government push, which is very good. But to be on some sort of sustainable growth path, we need private investment to pick up, which has been low for almost a decade, and we need consumption to pick up. So,
last point, Barkha, just to emphasize this, why aren't foreign investors, I'm talking about FDI, beating its way into India? If you look at the last couple of years, it's fallen off. India is the China plus one of those countries which could be an offset to China. India, of course, is growing fast. All this would mean that foreign capital should be, jumping in, but it's not. We're trying to attract it through, industrial freebies, and that suggests there's something which is not right, which we need to remedy, even as we are growing fast.